I feel like a lot of us international kids are sort of constantly evolving. For you, has it been a changing thing, or has there always been sort of a constant that I am always definitely this thing?
Right. Yeah, no, it's always been changing. I think that for me it was complicated because, so I was born in Tokyo actually, and Japanese was my first language. And then we went to Korea and I was, because I in my mind I was Japanese. We had a Japanese maid and then I was told, no, actually, you're Korean.
Mm.
And so I'm in Korea, we have a Korean maid. I start to learn Korean. And then I'm told, no, actually, you're an American. You're going to go to an American school and speak English. And so that was, and then we were going back and forth. And I spent 1 year in the States. So for a long time, I really couldn't figure out where I was, except for my dad was born in Honolulu, and we would go there frequently for what when you're in the government, you get and living overseas, you get what's called home leave. Every 2 years, you get to go back to the States for 2 months. And so we would go back mostly to Honolulu and to California for those 2 months. And so that's when I started thinking, this is where I belong.
Welcome to Tokyo Alumni Podcast. This is episode 94. My guest is an award-winning novelist, a Guggenheim Fellow, winner of the American Book Award and the Edgar, and for nearly 2 decades, the editor of Ploughshares. But before all that, he was a Korean American kid growing up in Tokyo and Seoul as a diplomat's son. Today, we'll get into that childhood, his life as a writer, and his latest collection, The Partition. Don Lee, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Great to be on with you.
Yeah, thank you for being. I think this is our 94th episode. And before we get into any of the writing, can you take me back to Tokyo for a second? What's the first thing that comes to mind when you think about being a kid there?
Well, I was there from 1974 to 78. And so it was a different time, obviously a long time ago. But what I remember is getting to school and taking, the subway and then the Yamanote line to Shinjuku and the Chuo line and just the whole thing taking, I think it was about an hour and a half maybe. And so I remember getting up at 6:30 in the morning, my mom saying, "You gotta get up, you gotta get up," and then just running to the subway.
Your position as kind of like I guess at ASIJ, being Korean, being American, but also being at a school in Japan, did you feel a sense of belonging either in Tokyo or at ASIJ?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I think it's because, all of us who were there, there were some American kids, and that was the first time being overseas, and they were just there for a couple of years or something. But a lot of the kids were like me. We were nomads.
Mhm.
That we were constantly shuttling around. For me, it was mostly between Japan and Korea, and living on embassy compounds and army bases in Korea. And so there were a lot of kids who were, even though their parents were working for corporations who shuttled around like that. And so, of course, that kind of life, transitory life, leads you to, feel a little bit lost and, not knowing where you exactly belong, not feeling, at home when you go to your home country. And so there were other kids very much like that. And so I did feel like we were compadres in that way.
Did you ever feel like for the rest, after leaving ASIJ, have you ever been able to be in an environment that felt as sort of nomadic and as sort of, there's the people talk about sort of like America being either like a mix of, I forgot the expression, right? It was like like a salad or a soup. By the way, it's a mixed place, right? But I've never really felt personally that America's as sort of as diverse as people make it out to be. Like in your experience, have you ever been able to identify a place where you felt like everyone was kind of nomadic?
Well, not nomadic, but I think probably the most diverse place is, for me, for any kind of Asian American, is Hawaii. That's a place where, I don't have to. You don't get those questions like, "Oh, where are you from?" Or, and they just sort of assume that you're an immigrant,
Mm.
and on the mainland, and so certainly not after Hawaii. It's California, it's Seattle, those places where you don't get those kinds of questions or microaggressions that you would call it these days. But yeah. You don't have that sense of anywhere else as you did when you're going to an international school overseas.
Mm. And I mean, that seems to be a constant theme in your writing, right? This idea of belonging, this idea of being part of something sort of bigger than you. What has your personal journey been like in regards to sort of who you identify with, where you identify with? I feel like a lot of us international kids are sort of constantly evolving. For you, has it been a changing thing, or has there always been sort of a constant that I am always definitely this thing?
Right. Yeah, no, it's always been changing. I think that for me it was complicated because, so I was born in Tokyo actually, and Japanese was my first language. And then we went to Korea, and I was, because I in my mind I was Japanese. We had a Japanese maid, and then I was told, no, actually, you're Korean.
Mm.
And so I'm in Korea, we have a Korean maid. I start to learn Korean. And then I'm told, no, actually, you're an American. You're going to go to an American school and speak English. And so that was, and then we were going back and forth, and I spent 1 year in the States. So for a long time, I really couldn't figure out where I was, except for my dad was born in Honolulu, and we would go there frequently for what when you're in the government, you get, and living overseas, you get what's called home leave. Every 2 years, you get to go back to the States for 2 months. And so we would go back mostly to Honolulu and to California for those 2 months. And so that's when I started thinking, this is where I belong. And so I have, and then eventually my dad, when he retired in first California for a couple of years, and then for the longer time in Hawaii. So that's where I really felt like I belonged.
That's really interesting how, yeah, you're truly multicultural, TCK, right? You check off all the boxes, right? Of what a lot of
Yeah.
it's maybe just one of the two. Like I always say I'm like a fake TCK because I grew up in Japan where I did speak Japanese. So I felt like I had like half, you know what I mean, home ground advantage. Whereas I do have friends, a few actually who've been on this podcast who are, just like totally Caucasian and they just speak, they speak Japanese better than me, and I think it's a very different path. But I think kind of connecting it to your writing, right? With the most recent writing you've had. So Yellow was about Asian American characters in a small town. Partition is about Asian Americans who've made it in the arts and media. I think one thing I'd be really interested to sort of elaborate more with you on is things have changed, right? And I often I'm
Mhm.
39, so I mean I emphasize this to my students. I'm still relatively mid-career. I mean they think I'm ancient, but like I'm mid-career, and even for me, I tell them, hey, look, like 20 years ago, it was like unfathomable, for example, to see a Asian American to be sort of the like I don't know if you've seen 13 Reasons Why. That's an example I actually often bring up to students, but it's where it was shocking to me. So this was in 2019. It was like a high school drama thing, right? And you have kind of your main
Mhm.
character, you got your like jocks, etc., and sort of the football player, right? Kind of the good-looking guy who was not very smart was an Asian American. And I was teaching Korean back then. I was telling the kids, like, I was for them it was normal though. For them it was normal. So anyways, what I'm trying to say is even within the last
Yeah.
20 years, we've seen cataclysmic changes. How has that been for you as a writer who's been, so closely analyzing things
Mm.
about race and now, connecting that to media and art?
Yeah, definitely things have changed. When I was starting out, and I got actually a sort of a late start as a writer. I was writing all the time, but I was pretty much consumed with my job at the literary journal Ploughshares, which I was doing full time, 5 days a week. Um, and so, it wasn't until maybe I was 38 that I decided I was going to put a book together. And that's actually all I had planned was I wanted to do one book. But the question was for me then, what kind of book? I knew that it was going to be these stories that I've written over the years. But what I sort of saw in the landscape at that time were a lot of sort of novels and stories from Asian Americans about immigrants, mostly, or immigrants or about old Asia. And so, I didn't, and in particular, sort of multi-generations, if we start with people who are in Korea, China, Japan, and then as a generation immigrants to the US and them dealing with that and with families. And that wasn't my story. And I wasn't particularly interested in writing that I thought that there was enough of that. And so my objective really with that first collection, Yellow,
Mm,
was to just have people who were, yes, they were Asian American, but I didn't particularly have them dwell on being Asian American, that they were just, regular people who were dealing with just regular problems. And so there were attorneys, there were surfers, there were chair makers, all of that. But I didn't go so much. Yeah, there are a couple of them, but not so much into questions about race and identity and ethnicity. And so, but at that time, people found that revolutionary. They kept on saying, "Oh, wow, actually, Asian Americans can be regular people."
mm,
And so that was sort of the reception that I got. And but nonetheless, even though that was my point, it's still when I went on book tour, I would do interviews. Um, they would always just ask me about being Asian American, about the Asian American experience,
mm,
and even about immigration
mm,
and assimilation and the states and everything like that. And so, what I've typically done though is, but still, I mean, that is something that in terms of grappling with identity is still a topic that's important and generative. And so what I've tended to do, I've published 6 books now. I'm working on a seventh. Is that every other book maybe I'll address race, and
mm,
then I get tired of it, and I'll not do it in the next book. And but what I've seen sort of different now is that probably my work and people at that time, 25 years ago, Yellow came out, was that I would get the most reaction from younger Asian Americans
mm,
who were recognizing themselves in the work, and who are third generation, fourth generation, and saying, yeah, this is me. Like I'm not, that sort of married to the older generations and those traditions that I'm very American. And so, that's happened over the years where now I see most Asian American writers uh, that they are moving on,
Mm,
or they have moved on, and
yeah.
they're writing, about other topics, and they're writing like speculative books, or thrillers, and they don't really care about writing about identity. And so, I think that's what's really changed over time.
That's really interesting. Yeah, how you alternate, and I think you brought up even a more interesting point of how there's this like dichotomy of like on one hand, if you're Asian American or just Asian and you're in a field, it's like you're representing the ethnicity, but at the other hand, it's like you want to be more than just that tagline, right? Like and I think and that actually came up, and when I was researching about you, you actually went as far as saying you'd kind of wish that one day we're past that point, right, of writing about race. That's actually a really interesting point too, where I imagine that can be for some people controversial, right? Especially in America, where I feel like sort of. So, do you want to elaborate on that point a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that always, what I was trying to do was I was trying to the label Donnelly Asian American writer kind of irked me because what I wanted to do was to be known as a writer who happens to be Asian American,
Mm,
and so to look at the writing first, not that it's necessarily the social political aspects of the writing, and. And over the years, I've kind of questioned, like, all right, how if I wrote my main character, who was, a white guy from New Jersey?
mm,
How would people react to that? And somebody, actually an Asian American, Korean American writer did write about a middle-aged white guy from New Jersey, and that was Chang Rae Lee,
mm.
with I forgot the name of that book, but and I thought that was incredibly brave of him, that he would do that. And so, but I know that there were some people who kind of criticized that because they thought that it was, in a way, it was sort of he was trying to whitewash himself, or to that it was a form of race betrayal,
Mm.
not to have a Asian American character or protagonist. And so I think that that's something that we continue to grapple with, is that at the same time we don't want to be denying who we are, and our race, but our ethnicity. But at the same time, I think writers don't want to be hemmed in
Mm.
to what I call it is the ethnic literature box,
Mm.
to be trapped into that and only write about that. We want to be able to do something else, and so if somebody in Germany is writing, in from the point of view of an English lord in the Victorian era, nobody complains about that and says, how can you do that? You don't have the right to do that. And so it's a reverse cultural appropriation in a way,
Mm.
this expectation that if you're a writer of color, that you have a protagonist who is not of color, who might be white, and so it's really ironic and kind of bizarre when you think about it, that you have people with that criticism. But then again, probably the people who will criticize the most are actually people of color, readers of color.
There's definitely an irony of that. And as you were mentioning that, and I was just thinking, like, for example, I don't know if you know Vinland Saga. It's a comic book. It's a
No,
Japanese one, Japanese writer about, Vikings. And I was just thinking, like, Imagine how sad that would be if Japanese writers could only write about Japanese history.
Exactly.
We would be deprived of just so much wonderful art. And I usually don't input my own ideas, but I can go on the record to say I totally agree with your perspective that like it's just kind of like this reverse it wasn't what's the way you phrased it? It wasn't racism, but reverse
Cultural appropriation.
yeah, it's like reverse cultural appropriation to put people in a box. And I was actually, as you're speaking, I could picture walking into like a bookstore and you see like black authors, Asian authors,
Yeah,
but you're saying
yeah,
like it's not, you could be white, black, or Asian and write mystery or write, like any type of
right.
genre. And I do believe, and maybe this is, some people might call me naive, and this is my ASIJ background, but I do think we will get there eventually.
Yeah, yeah. We'll get there eventually, but it's ebbs and flows, right? That we made great progress, and things have dialed back dramatically in recent years. But I think the pendulum will swing back, and
Mm.
each time that pendulum swings, it's a little bit farther, and
Mm.
so I think we will get there eventually.
Yeah, I'm optimistic too. So you were editor, right, at Ploughshares for
Mm,
a while, almost 20 years, I think 17 to be exact. So you've read a lot of writing. What
mm,
would be your advice towards young writers in regards to you've rejected a bunch, right, and you've accepted a bunch?
mm.
What's the difference between, a
Yeah.
writer, good piece of writing and bad piece of writing?
And also, I was for 15 years, I was actually longer than that, 17 years, I was teaching creative writing full time at universities and colleges. And so, my biggest piece of advice is really don't try so hard to be literary. That's usually the first thing that I would see as an editor is I would start reading a story, and what I wanted to do was I wanted to just kind of relax and say, okay, this is a writer who's telling me a story and not trying. And so most of the time, with what I mean by somebody trying too hard to be literary, it would that first page would be filled with modifiers, with adjectives and adverbs. It would just be stuffed with somebody who's trying to impress you with their style. And instead, there's kind of natural fluidity to their voice, their narrative voice. That's what would give them authority and would allow me to relax and get into the story and to trust this writer. I would say that that's the main thing.
And a follow-up to that would be we live in a very different world now with AI. How has that impacted? I mean, I know now you're no longer at Ploughshares and you're, in a slightly different position, but I imagine you still engage, right, with a lot of writing. Um, and how is that? And I mean, and as much as I think it's AI really took off, would you say 2 years ago? But it's been around from about 4 or 5 years ago, I think, right? When
Yeah, I
OpenAI.
think it's 2022. That is when ChatGPT started out, and I didn't see any of that in my teaching, thankfully. But I know that some of my friends who are teaching at schools, surprisingly, they're finding that their undergraduate students are using AI to hand in poems and short stories, and but it's often recognizable. But I think that AI is getting better.
Mhm.
And so, I don't know if you heard about this, but recently there was a controversy because Granta magazine, which is a pretty prominent literary journal, comes out of England, but they had an international short story contest, and one of the prize winners, they published a story, and then people immediately said, "This is obviously generated by AI."
Oh,
And put it through AI detectors, and it would say this is 100% written by AI. And
yeah.
the author has not spoken, refuses to talk about it, and I think the Granta magazine has said, we don't know, and so we can't, we're not going to rescind the prize or pull it from the web, but. I think that this is what's going to happen is, and then actually the CEO of Barnes and Noble has said, the largest bookstore chain in the country has said that he is not opposed
Mm.
to books written by AI in the future, as long as they're identified as AI. And so this is going to become a big issue. For me, it's been extremely useful for research.
Mm.
That instead of spending going down a rabbit hole with internet research or for through things like LexisNexis and through the library, it's much quicker to put scenarios into Claude or ChatGPT and say, I'm writing right now this book, and I have this scene where I wanted somebody to be forced to jump out of a turboprop plane, but
Yeah.
survive.
Yeah.
And then, but the issue I had was, is it possible to close the door to a plane when it's in the air?
Yeah.
Even if it's like at 200 feet, how
Yeah.
difficult would it be? And so that was a question I put to ChatGPT, and so it's things like that where it's very helpful. Even if it ends up that ChatGPT was hallucinating
Mm.
and gave me the wrong answer, but still, it's fiction.
Yeah.
It's a novel, and so I just need to pass a plausibility test,
Yeah.
not necessarily have it be spot on in terms of accuracy. Whereas the difference is with some nonfiction books, and there was a case recently where it was pointed out that something like six citations or quotes that the person made had been actually false, had been made up by ChatGPT,
Yeah.
and so they had to, walk those back. But yeah, that's definitely going to be a huge issue in the future. Of what do you do with this when things have been uh, written by AI?
It's like a prominent author like yourself, though, does use some cloud, some ChatGPT for research. But I guess one of your main take homes is that it's very different in the nonfiction versus fiction market.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Right. And it's also very different of, what type of writing you're doing. That, with ChatGPT always offers, after I ask a question and it kind of remembers your previous chats. And so it knows that you're working on this novel, and it'll always ask me, do you want me to write a scene? And,
yeah.
and, and so, I just out of curiosity, once I said, okay, that it was just terrible writing.
Oh no.
And so ever since then, what I've said is stop asking me this question because
Yeah.
I don't want your bad writing. But maybe for genre writers, that matters less. And people who are pumping out, and people have admitted, oh yeah, I'm using ChatGPT to write. Or there's actually, I think, a new AI service called Chapter,
Mm.
and that is spitting out whole books after getting prompts. So for like romance novels or
Yeah.
science fiction or something or another, where the pure kind of literary style
Mm.
doesn't matter as much. That people are saying, okay, let's do it. Let's pump out these books.
That's really fascinating. Especially like, yeah, I'm always curious to hear what writers' perspectives are in regards to AI because I think that it's a spectrum too, right? I imagine even in the circles you are in, there are some people who don't use AI at all. And that's always been a little bit, to me, to be honest, a little puzzling because I get where it comes from, but at the same time, I think we're only heading in one direction.
Yeah, but it's true though that there are actually some before even AI came along, there are writers who actually don't want to either don't want to do research
Mm,
or else they don't want to write stories that would require research because they want to use their imagination. And so, it could be actually some laziness, maybe, that is saying, yeah, if this thing is going to require research, I don't want to write it. I'm going to write another story.
mm,
But it's mostly just using your imagination of, to stop. I mean, in some ways, for me right now, actively for this particular project, the current project that I'm actively using AI for research. In some ways, I have to stop myself at times and say, look, I
mm,
can make this up. It's a novel.
mm,
And so, I can just kind of imagine this and it doesn't necessarily, have to, be totally factual. That, and, there, of course, if when the book eventually comes out, there will be people who will call me on the inaccuracies, but I think that's okay.
mm.
I will probably have something as I have in the past, in the acknowledgments or the author's note in the back say, forgive me for the inaccuracies of this and suspend your disbelief.
Something I wanted to ask you, because I write myself, right? I'm obviously not anywhere near the caliber you are. But there's when I go on runs, that's kind of when I feel inspiration. For you, what has been a way that you get inspired and get new ideas for your writing?
Yeah, what I do is I actually I run myself, and so I do get ideas when I'm working on a project. But what I do is I keep a notebook, and it's usually starts out with questions. I might have just sort of a vague idea, but I'll use it to continue to develop the story and just keep on writing. Also, I'll show you the current one. Just scribbling things down and until I am able to figure it out. And so this has happened actually with numerous. More so probably with short stories where I'm trying to figure out what is going to happen at the end
Hmm.
and then just I as I'm writing, I continue to write, jot things down in the notebook, and then something will finally click.
Hmm.
But it's really just that with writing notes, uh, and oftentimes. I will, for instance, for this current novel that I'm writing,
Hmm.
I started writing notes for years ago,
Hmm.
and but I was working on other stuff,
Hmm.
and so I kept those notes, and then finally, when I was ready to embark on this novel, I would look back on that particular notebook.
Oh, have you read Murakami Haruki's like What I Think About When I'm Running? I think roughly I'm paraphrasing there.
Yeah. And yeah, definitely. I mean, for him, I mean, he's a marathon runner, and so he goes on long, long runs.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's somebody that I admire quite a lot.
It's funny you mentioned his marathon running because I felt a sense of closeness when I found out he was a runner, but then when I saw his times, I realized like we were just different creatures though. Like he's like a real, you know. Like, I thought I was pretty fast, but yeah, he's an interesting guy. And I wanted to still extend on this like inspiration part. Just one last part I want to touch upon is Rosarita Bay, right? And
Mm,
kind of inventing places. And I find that really unique because my wife does D&D. So as proxy, I was doing D&D for a while, which is a lot of imagination, right? Inventing new
right,
worlds. Like, how did that come about? Like to come up with your own, unique original.
right. It was actually a logistical problem because I went to UCLA, had friends in San Francisco, and so I would go up that Pacific Coast Highway, Highway 1 a lot, and then we'd camp in Big Sur, and so there was a town that I really liked the area, Half Moon Bay, it's called. And there were very, sort of interesting things about that town, real life things. But I wanted to be able to deviate from the real town. And
Mm,
so I thought, I can use sort of the environment, some of the problems they've had, like they were really sort of zoning for anti-development, and there were a lot of conflicts about that with people who live there. And the farming, the weather and everything else. But, I didn't have to stick to the facts of it. And so that's why I came up instead with a fake town. So I'd have a little bit more freedom to depart from what the reality.
okay. Yeah, because yeah, I was looking at the inspiration of the Half Moon Bay. I was actually in the East Bay as well, so that's an interesting California connection we have. But I want to sort of circle back to Tokyo. It's a city that you've mentioned in multiple pieces that you've written. And what about Tokyo makes it such a special place? Because it seems like you come back to the city in a lot of your pieces of writing.
Yeah. Well, as I said before, I was born there. And so I have that, I have that fondness and that connection. But yeah, I mean, I think especially when you're there for high school, it's one of the most exciting places that you can live. But really what made it so great, I think, for us was safety
Mm,
that parents weren't worried, especially during that time. Parents weren't worried about high school kids roaming the entire city alone,
yeah.
and so we could really we would go camping in Shimoda, and we'd sleep in caves on the beach. And so, we'd go skiing on ourselves. And so this is like the 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old kids, just being able to have that freedom. To do whatever you wanted without supervision of or chaperones.
Mhm.
And so that was, and of course, being such a cosmopolitan metropolis, really quite something. And so I love that, of being able to do that.
Yeah, the safety is hard to find many places in the world. I mean, I would say, ironically, another country that you and I actually have connections to. I lived in Korea for 10 years. I'd say
Mm.
Korea would probably be another place. Um,
Right.
some degree Saudi
Yeah.
Arabia, which is another place I live in. But yeah, there's not many places in the world. You can just leave your iPhone, out and
Right.
you just like
Yeah,
it's.
I remember I was going to sell or give some LPs to a friend of mine at school, and I was taking the Yamanote line, and I put them up on the rack. I
Mm,
stepped off, and the doors closed, and I realized, oh, I forgot my albums. And so I talked to the conductor, and it takes like an hour for the Yamanote line to come around. And so I
mm.
went to school. I came back at the end of the day, and he had my albums.
Yeah,
That nobody took them for the entire journey of that train to go all the way around,
yeah.
encircling Tokyo.
That's amazing part of Japan. I love stories like that, right? Where people just, yeah, people trust each other and it's kind of how a
Yeah,
city should be. Well, I want to finish off here with a rapid fire where you can answer these questions. If you want to add a sentence or two, that's fine. Just a list of, and as I was telling
Mm,
you off air, I don't love reading questions but I want to use the list I have here. So again, feel free to add a few sentences or just the book itself is fine. And yeah, let's do this. So, are you ready, Don?
sure.
All right. A book you think is criminally underrated.
Mm. I would say there's a novel called Stoner, and it's not what you would think. It's not about cannabis. It's by John Williams, and maybe people sort of in the literary field know about this, but not really anyone else. And it follows a guy's life. I think it's like 50s, 60s, where he grows up on a farm and
Mm,
goes to the University of Missouri, and then ends up getting his PhD there, and ends up being a professor of English, and it covers his entire life. But it's a very ordinary life, and it's a very sad life, kind of heartbreaking, but beautifully heartbreaking. And so that's criminally underrated or unknown.
Next question. The book that made you want to be a writer in the first place.
It was actually Catcher in the Rye, J.D. Salinger. And it was because when we first moved to Tokyo, that we were staying at the Sana Hotel in Akasaka, and it had a tiny bookstore. And I wasn't a reader at that time, 14, but I went into the bookstore, and I was attracted to the red spine of
Mm,
the paperback cover, and pulled it out. And of course, that blew me away, because I didn't know that you could do that in fiction.
yeah.
And yeah, and so that's what sort of started me as a reader. But I would say that the book that impressed me the most, growing up, was what you often hear, The Great Gatsby.
Okay, that's another good one.
Mm.
Book that, and then maybe this will overlap with one of your previous answers, but a book that you've reread the most times.
Hmm. Uh, yeah, you sort of stumped me on this. I'm trying to think, what have I reread? Well, I there's another book that's kind of unknown, So Long, See You Tomorrow,
Mm,
and by William Maxwell. It's a short novel, but I've reread that a lot because I've signed it for classes a lot, and uh, but then a more contemporary one is a book called Running Away by Jean-Philippe Toussaint, a
mm.
Belgian writer, it's a series of, I think, four books with the same character and the same woman, Marie, and I've reread that quite a few times on my own.
Interesting. All right, we have two more here of the books. The next one is, and well, maybe this overlaps with what you just answered, but the book you most often recommended to your students.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that there actually is another one, other than the aforementioned, which is Jesus' Son,
Mm,
the short story collection by Dennis Johnson, and so that's one that I assign a lot, but even to people who um, aren't in my classes, I'll recommend.
okay. And last question is a book that you are reading right now.
Uh, I just read my friend Paul Yoon's book. It's actually not going to come out until August, so I read it in the advanced reading copy, called Etna,
Mm.
and it's from the point of view of a dog.
Yeah,
It's who's was trained to be a war dog, and this is post-war of them trying to go back to the farm, where he grew up.
Well, that's a cool little author flex there that your favorite book is one that has not even come out yet. That might be the first time someone's ever told me that. So, not yet released book. But yeah, like it was great talking to you today. I was
Yeah, great talking to
really
you, Nick.
on a personal level, I was just very, it's refreshing to hear too about me not, because sometimes I feel isolated that when I talk about sort of almost a post-racial world, right, where I'm no longer, the half Japanese, half American guy. I'm just the guy that,
All
does
right.
podcasts and teaches history. Some people, don't seem to not love that, but it's good to know I'm not the only one that, kind of looking forward to that as well as it's very interesting hearing about AI as well as your history with just writing. But yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I don't care if this stays on air or not, but maybe we can talk off air a bit once this
Sure.
podcast concludes. And again, thank you so much for being guest for episode 94 of Tokyo Alumni Podcast.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.